My wife told me her sister's bridal luncheon was a small, quiet thing. Just the women, she said. 20 people at most. Nothing formal. You'd be bored out of your mind. I let her go without me because love makes that easy, and because I'd learned early on that the Hollowell family events had a way of making me feel like a piece of furniture that didn't quite match the room. But 6 hours later, I was standing in a hardware store parking lot in downtown Savannah, and my friend was holding his phone out to me with that look on his face. The one that means he doesn't want to be the one showing you what he's about to show you. On the screen was the Savannah Society Quarterly's Instagram, posted 40 minutes earlier, 112 photos, a string quartet, 60 women in garden hats and silk, and at the center of a long white table, my wife laughing, captioned beneath the image as Thea Hollowell, unattached professional and longtime patron of the arts. Not Hartley, not wife. Hollowell. They didn't just exclude me from the room, they erased me from the story entirely. My name is Penn Harcourt, and this isn't really about a bridal luncheon. It's about the slow erosion that happens when you love someone and mistake their family's silence for acceptance. I've been sitting with this for a while, trying to figure out how to tell it without bitterness, because bitterness isn't what I feel anymore, and I think that's the part worth talking about. If you're watching and you've ever felt invisible in a room of people who were supposed to welcome you, stay. I think you'll recognize some of this. And if you want more stories like this one, the real kind, the kind that don't wrap up neatly, hit subscribe. It means more than you know. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing how far this reaches. Now let me tell you everything. I met Thea 6 years ago at a Preservation Society fundraiser in the Ardsley Park neighborhood, back when I was 26 and had just started my own landscape contracting business, and still believed that doing good work was the only currency that mattered in the long run. She was standing by a garden wall covered in Confederate jasmine, wearing a yellow dress, arguing with the caterer about whether the centerpiece arrangements were too tall for conversation across the table. I walked over because I happened to know the caterer was right, and I thought maybe she'd want to know. She didn't, at first, but she laughed eventually. By the end of the night, we'd traded numbers, and I'd sketched out on a cocktail napkin what the garden could look like with the right pruning. 3 years later, we got married in that same garden. Her family, the Hollowells, came from old Savannah money. Not new money with something to prove, but the quiet, heavy kind that had been in the same houses for 4 generations and kept its name attached to hospital wings and park benches and historical plaques all over the city. Her mother, Lenora, was the kind of woman who knew everyone and was known by everyone, who smiled at you and made you feel genuinely seen and simultaneously made you aware, in some deep cellular way, that you were being assessed and had already been placed in a category you weren't told about. I liked her father from the beginning. Stafford Hollowell was a civil man who built furniture in his garage on weekends and had strong opinions about tomatoes. He shook my hand the first time we met and said, "You work with your hands. Good. That counts for something." He meant it. He just didn't have much power in that house. And I think he'd made his peace with that long before I arrived. The first time I understood the real shape of things, we were at Easter dinner. Thea's sister Josie was there with her fiancé, a third-generation Savannah man whose family was in shipping, who went to the right schools and wore cufflinks with a monogram crest. Lenora mentioned those cufflinks 3 times before the soup course. She had seated me at the far end of the table near the kitchen pass-through, and when a guest arrived late and came around introducing herself, Lenora said, "This is Penn. He does beautiful landscape work around the city." She didn't say husband. She didn't say Thea's. I looked across the table and waited for Thea to add it. She was laughing at something Josie said and didn't look up. I told myself it was an oversight. I had become skilled at that, translating small cruelties into larger contexts where they couldn't quite reach me. Families have their rhythms. She didn't hear. She was distracted. But I heard. There was also the matter of the cufflinks. My grandfather gave me a pair of silver ones the week before he died. Simple, engraved with his initials, nothing flashy. I wore them to the first Hollowell Christmas dinner. Lenora looked at them across the table and said with a full and pleasant smile, "How sweet. Are those vintage?" When I told her they were my grandfather's, she said, "Lovely. That kind of sentiment is so rare now," and turned to speak to someone else. I kept wearing them to every Hollowell event after that. Not out of stubbornness, not to make a point, just because they were mine, and I didn't see why that should require an apology. The morning everything cracked open, Thea was at the mirror in our bedroom, putting in her pearl earrings, not the small everyday ones. These were the long drop pearls, her grandmother's, kept in a velvet box that lived at Lenora's house, not ours. I'd seen them once before at Josie's engagement announcement dinner. The velvet box was sitting open on the dresser. I noticed it and said nothing. She was dressed more formally than a small lunch required. A silk blouse I'd seen maybe twice, pressed linen trousers, the heels she wore to gallery openings. I asked if she wanted company. She laughed, warm, easy, practiced. Pen, it's all going to be seating charts and flower debates, and Josie crying at cake samples. You'd last 40 minutes. I'll be home by 4. She kissed me on the cheek and picked up her bag. I watched her car back out of the drive from the kitchen window. She'd left her coffee half finished on the counter. Steam was still curling off the top. Kit and I had plans to drive to a salvage yard on the south side. I was looking for antique ironwork for a restoration job, and we'd stopped at a hardware store first. Kit was the kind of friend who had been in my life long enough to know when something was wrong and steady enough not to perform sympathy about it. He handed me his phone and said, "Hey, look at this," just like that. The Savannah Society quarterly account had a wide following. They posted regularly, charity galas, historic home tours, wedding announcements. The post was an hour old. The main photograph was a wide shot of the old Pink House event room set for a formal luncheon. Flowers on every surface, women in pastels and wide-brim hats, a string quartet positioned near the windows. I scrolled slowly. There was Josie at the head table, laughing with both hands raised. There was Lenora beside her, composed and glowing in pale green, and 2 seats down, there was my wife, her grandmother's pearls at her ears, her hair pinned the way she only pinned it for things that mattered to her, laughing at something I would never know. The caption read, "A beautiful afternoon celebrating Josie's Hollowell's upcoming wedding." Pictured with the bride-to-be, Lenora Hollowell, mother of the bride, and Thea Hollowell, unattached professional and arts patron, alongside beloved family friends. Unattached. I handed Kit his phone and walked to the edge of the parking lot and stood there for a while, looking at the live oaks across the road. The branches were heavy with Spanish moss. Everything was very still. I called Thea. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted. I saw the quarterly post. "Call me when you can." Delivered. Unread. Kit appeared at my shoulder and didn't say anything useful, because there wasn't anything useful to say. He drove me home. The house was quiet in the way houses get when something is shifted and the walls haven't caught up yet. I went to the bedroom. The velvet box sat open on the dresser, empty. The pearl earrings were on her ears, across the city, in a room that had given her a different name. I opened my own drawer and took out the silver cufflinks, sat on the edge of the bed and turned them over in my palm. The engraving was worn from years of handling. My grandfather had worn them to his daughter's wedding, to his retirement dinner, to the day he came home from the hospital the last time. They were plain, and they were not fashionable, and they were his and then mine. I put them back and closed the drawer. That evening, just past 7, I got a text from Thea's aunt, her mother's older sister, a retired schoolteacher who lived in a small house in Thunderbolt and who had, from the very first dinner, treated me like I belonged at whatever table I was sitting at. She wrote, "Pen, someone mentioned there was a big luncheon for Josie today. I wasn't told. Were you there?" I stared at it for a long time. Then I took a screenshot of the magazine post and sent it to her. I wrote, "No, I wasn't told either." She didn't respond for 11 minutes. When she did, she said only, "I see." Thea came home at 8:30, a little flushed, her grandmother's pearls still in her ears. She set a small party favor bag on the hall table and came to the kitchen where I was standing with a glass of water I wasn't drinking. "How was it?" I asked. "Good, nice. Long." She pulled off her heels by the back door. "Mom went overboard on the flowers, but what else is new?" 60 guests, I said. She went still. "String quartet," I said. "Formal luncheon, full quarterly spread." I paused, small and quiet. She turned around slowly. "Pen, I'm not angry," I said, and I meant it. The anger that I expected hadn't arrived. What was there instead was something quieter and more final, the feeling of a door closing on something that had been open too long. "I'm just done translating. I've been translating everything your family does into something kinder than it is for years. I'm tired." I set down the glass. "The magazine called you unattached." She closed her eyes. "Did you know they were going to do that?" I asked. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. The photographer was going to be there, she said finally, her voice careful. Mom said she wanted everything consistent, that having you there would complicate. There's a business family from Atlanta that Dad has been trying to impress, and she didn't want She stopped. The complication, I said. That's what she called it. Or me, one of the two. Thea reached up and took out the pearl earrings one at a time, set them on the counter between us. I should have told you. I should have refused her. I don't know why I never know how to do that. Her voice was worn down to its honest edge. I'm sorry, I actually mean that. I know you do, I said. That's always been the hardest part. I went to bed. She didn't. Neither of us said anything about that out loud. It just happened the way things do when two people both understand what the night requires. The next morning, the editor of the Savannah Society Quarterly called me. I'd never spoken to her before in my life, and the fact that she was calling told me everything I needed to know before she said a word. Thea's aunt had sent a formal written letter, not a complaint in the ordinary sense, but a statement on personal letterhead, copied to two members of the magazine's regional advertiser board, both of whom she had known professionally for decades. The letter named me by name. It named the caption. It asked specifically how that editorial decision had been reached. The editor was professional and clearly unsettled. She said the instructions had come directly from Lenora Hollowell, in writing, prior to the event. She said the magazine had followed standard practice of deferring to family guidance on caption language. She apologized twice. When I asked calmly if she would be willing to forward me the original email chain, she said yes without hesitating. I think she wanted it somewhere other than just her own inbox. It arrived 20 minutes later. I read it sitting on the back steps, looking at the garden I'd spent 2 summers building. Lenora's email was 3 paragraphs. The relevant section read, "As discussed, please list Thea under her family name, Hollowell, and describe her as an unattached professional and arts patron. We'd prefer her personal situation not be highlighted, as the Brackett family from Atlanta will be in attendance, and we want to present the family in the most favorable light for potential partnership discussions." Personal situation. That's what 3 years of marriage was in her framing. A personal situation to be managed away from the camera. I sat there until the neighbor's dog stopped barking and the morning found its quiet. A mockingbird landed on the garden wall, sang for a while, and left. I thought about nothing in particular, which is sometimes the only thing that makes sense. Lenora called that afternoon and asked if we could meet for dinner. Just family, she said, just to talk. Her voice was smooth and reasonable, as it always was. I said yes. The restaurant was a private dining club on Bull Street. Soft lighting, no printed menu on the door. The kind of room designed to make difficult conversations feel like they're being handled by reasonable adults. Thea and I drove there separately. When I walked in, Lenora was already seated with Stafford, Josie, and Thea, who looked at me across the table with an expression that had a lot of work to do. Lenora rose slightly as I sat, gracious, practiced, a reflex so well trained it had become indistinguishable from warmth. "Pen, thank you for coming. I think there was a misunderstanding with the magazine. These things happen with large events. We never intended to suggest." I took my phone from my breast pocket and set it on the table, face up. "The email came from your personal account," I said, "at 11:17 on the 14th. The editor forwarded it this morning." Lenora looked at the phone, then at me. I turned the screen toward her so she could see the preview. She didn't need me to read it aloud. She'd written it. She knew exactly what it said. The table went quiet in the particular way it does when everyone in the room has just understood something simultaneously, and nobody is ready to speak first. Josie was looking at the centerpiece. Stafford was looking at his wife. Thea had her hands flat on the tablecloth, very still. "Lenora," Stafford said, "just her name, nothing else." And just from the way he said it, I understood that he hadn't known either. "It was a business consideration," Lenora said, her voice having shifted into something careful and contained. "The Bracketts are a traditional family, and Stafford needed to." "For your image," I said, "not a business requirement, a choice you made." I kept my voice level. I was not interested in performance. I've been watching how this works for 3 years, the seating, the introductions, the events I found out about in photos. I let all of it go because I kept telling myself I was misreading it. I looked at her directly. I wasn't misreading it. I stood. "Pen," Thea said. "I'm not done with you," I said. "That's your decision to make, not mine. But this table," I didn't gesture at the room specifically, just at the arrangement, the whole careful architecture of the evening, the flowers and the lighting and the performance of reasonableness. I won't sit at this table again. I left enough on the table for my coffee and walked out onto Bull Street, where the night air smelled like magnolia and rain moving in off the water. A couple walked past with a dog. A light came on in a window across the street. Ordinary things, still ordinary. I drove to Kit's apartment and we watched a baseball game and ordered pizza, and I didn't explain much and he didn't push for much, which was the most useful thing anyone could have done for me that night. I moved into a short-term rental near Forsyth Park 2 weeks later. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor of an old row house, windows facing west. In the evenings, the light came in low and golden and stretched itself long across the wood floors. I started running again, something I'd let go years back when my life filled up with things that didn't necessarily deserve all the time I gave them. The work helped. I had a restoration project, an overgrown garden behind a stone wall in the Landmark District. The family had padlocked the gate 30 years ago after a legal dispute, and no one had touched it since. The first time I went in with my crew, the whole place was chest-high with jasmine gone wild and azaleas grown scraggly from lack of shaping. But the original garden was still there underneath. You could feel the bones of it, old brick paths, a dry fountain, the remnants of a boxwood parterre. It had just been buried under everything that grew over it unchecked. We spent 6 weeks working through it. A month after the dinner, I got a letter from Thea. She'd found her own apartment across town. She was seeing a therapist, she said. She wrote, "I spent so long trying to hold both worlds together that I stopped noticing what I was asking you to accept. I don't know if that can be repaired, but I wanted you to know that when I look at our wedding photos now, what I feel is grief, not for losing you, but for not fighting harder to keep us." I read it twice, folded it, put it in the nightstand drawer. Some things need time to find their shape before you can put the right words to them. The Hollowell name appeared in a society column 6 weeks after that, in a short item noting that the Brackett family had declined to move forward with a partnership with Stafford's firm. The columnist described it as a mutual decision. I didn't know what had been said between them or how much of the public situation had factored in. I didn't need to know. What I did know, Thea's aunt had been quietly disinvited from the Hollowell family standing Sunday dinner, a weekly tradition that had run for 40 years. She told me herself in a phone call, in a voice that was tired but not broken. "I've been swallowing things about that woman for decades," she said. "I'm a little relieved, honestly. The food was never as good as everyone pretended." She was the one who put my name forward for the Historic Preservation Society's largest landscaping commission of the year. Her recommendation letter said I was a person of unusual integrity. I kept a copy of it in my desk. The day we finished the Landmark District garden, I walked through it alone in the late afternoon. The old fountain was running again. The boxwood hedges had been cut back and shaped to the original design. The jasmine, properly pruned, was putting out clean new growth, controlled now, purposeful, going exactly where it was supposed to go. It smelled like the whole city was flowering at once. I stood by the gate and thought about what it takes to restore something that's been hidden a long time. The structure is always there. It just needs someone to clear away what doesn't belong. Before I left, I reached into the breast pocket of my jacket and took out the silver cufflinks. Turned them over once in my hand, the engraving worn smooth from years of use, the weight of them exactly what it had always been. My grandfather worked with his hands his whole life and never once apologized for it. I put the cufflinks back into my pocket. There are things people try to take from you without touching you: your name, your place at the table, the simple right to be acknowledged in the life you're actually living. Sometimes they manage it for a while, but a lie about who you are is the most unstable structure there is. It requires constant maintenance. It needs everyone in the room to keep agreeing not to look at it directly. I wasn't willing to do that work anymore. The truth doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it just stands there, quietly, until the silence finally runs out of room to hide in. I walked out through the garden gate. The evening air was warm and smelled like rain about to fall, the kind that washes everything clean and leaves the world a little more honest than it found it. I was ready for whatever came next.